Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another deck profile. Today is going to be a Dragon World deck, and it's going to be centered around 5th Omni Super Dragon Sky Emperor Mugen Drum. This is going to be a control deck, and as such it's going to have a lot of reactionary plays on the opponent's turn. Drum's ability, which when you take damage, destroy a monster on your opponent's field and gain a life, is a very key and important part to that strategy. As such, we're going to run 4 of the Buddy. Next, we run 5th Omni Super Cavalier Dragon Sandstorm Staff Arkaid. With its ability, when you're dealt damage, you put the top card of your deck into your gauge and gain a life. So it helps us mitigate our life because a lot of our cards cost us life, and when we're attacked and dealt damage by the opponent, that also costs us life, so we need ways to mitigate that. And then on top of that, you can draw a card and call up to one 5th Omni monster from your hand by paying its call cost, and it becomes a size 0 if it's your turn. So the idea is play it in your center and then use a spell to deal damage to yourself, gain a gauge, gain the life back that you just spent, and then draw a card, and then you could call one monster with 5th Omni. So most of the time you're going to want to call Drum. So making Drum a size 0 with Arkaid in your center is already a pretty solid formation. Next, we run 5th Omni Cavalier Dragon Merak SD. This card can't be called to the center. If you have an original size 2 or greater armor dragon on your field, this card's size is reduced by 2. And then he has a counteract ability. Choose an armor dragon on your field. For this turn, it gets plus 10,000 power, plus 10,000 defense, and penetrate, and you take 1 damage. So most of the time, he's going to be a size 0 to just basically deal us a damage to proc the abilities. Next, we run 4 copies of 5th Omni Cavalier Dragon, Doble SD, and Meglax SD. This is the tutor of the deck. It's a really solid card, so if you have an original size 2 or greater armor dragon on your field, its size is reduced by 1, so it becomes a size 0. And then 5th Omni Resonance is its ability. When this card enters the field, put 1 item or monster with 5th Omni in its name from your deck into your hand, shuffle your deck, and you take 2 damage, and then you can only use that ability once per turn. Next, we run 4 copies of 5th Omni Dragon Lord Drum SD. This card can't be called to the center. It has a counteract ability. Put the top card of your deck into the soul of a monster on your field, and you take 1 damage. Most of the time, you're just going to use it to increase the soul of Mugen Drum and proc its ability. Next, we run 2 copies of Omni Super Dragon Lord Fierce Deity Tenbu. This is basically the backup win condition card, so if we can't somehow get Drum, or all of our drums are gone and we can't get it back, which is not very often, we just play Tenbu. So what this card does is its call cost is put a monster from your field into its soul and pay 2 gauge. Then when this card enters the field or when you take damage, destroy all monsters on your opponent's field. And then you could only use the ability once per turn. Next, we run 2 copies of 5th Omni Cavalier Dragon Arkaid SD. This is one of the newer cards introduced into the deck, and it's a really solid card. So it has a counteract ability. Choose a size 2 or greater with 5th Omni in its name from your drop zone. You may put that card onto the field from your drop zone by paying its call cost, and you take 1 damage. And then that card size becomes 0 until it leaves the field. Basically, it replaces itself with whatever card you want in your drop zone that has 5th Omni in its name. Next, we move on to the spells. We run 4 copies of Dragowhite 5th Omni Holy Light. This is one of the other newer cards introduced into the deck, and it's just a really good card. So its call cost is you take 2 damage. That's not that big of a deal because with Mugen Drum on the field, we can gain a life back. Its first part is you draw a card, and then you get to choose one of the 2 abilities. So you could either gain 5 life, or for this turn, when a card is destroyed on your opponent's field, you deal 2 damage to your opponent. This is just an extremely powerful card having those options. The gaining 5 life makes it a better Dragoguts, and the dealing 2 damage to the opponent kind of makes it like a slightly worse Quake Slash. Next, we run 4 copies of Dragowisdom Knowledge of the 5th Omni. So you can only cast this card if you have a card with 5th Omni on your field, and then you take a damage as its cast cost, and then you put the top card of your deck into your gauge, and you draw 1 card. It's just a really solid charge and draw. The life requirement is used to proc the abilities of our 5th Omni monsters. Next, we run 4 copies of Dragon Lord Quake Slash. You pay 1 gauge, you take a damage, and then it has the counter ability, destroy a monster on your opponent's field. Then if you have a drum monster on your field, you deal 2 damage to your opponent, and then you can only cast it once per turn. This obviously combos really well with Mugen Drum because you pay the damage, Mugen Drum's ability procs, destroy a monster, then this card also can destroy another monster, and then it'll deal 2 damage. So it's just really good at trying to like clear the field. Next, we run 3 copies of Lord's Dragon Shield. So you can only cast this card during an attack on your opponent's turn if you don't have a center. So with this defensive spell, you have to leave your center open. And then what it does is nullify the attack and you take 1 damage. And this card can't be nullified. So it's just pretty solid because you'll take the damage, probably trigger Mugen Drum's ability, gain the life, and then kill something on top of nullifying the attack. Next, we run 2 copies of Dragowhite 5th Omni Light. So its cast cost is you take a damage, and then you can put the top card of your deck into your gauge and put a monster with 5th Omni in its name from your drop zone to your hand. It just helps us fish out whatever we need from our drop on top of charging us a gauge. Next, we run 2 copies of Sky Dragon Divinity. Sky Dragon Divinity we can only cast if there's 10 or less cards in our drop, most of the time because we're either putting them back into our hand or putting them back into the field. That condition's not that terrible to meet. And we pay 1 gauge and pay 1 life. Note, it's not take a damage, so it doesn't proc the abilities of our 5th Omnis, but it's still a solid card. You put 3 cards from your drop zone to the bottom of your deck in any order. If you do, draw 2 cards. So we mostly care about just drawing 2 cards with this card, and we don't really care about some of the other stuff. The putting 3 cards back from the drop zone can help because we can use Doble SD to search it out again. Next, we run 2 copies of Dragoguts. So it's just a simple, you take 1 damage, you gain 3 life. It's just a trigger for the 5th Omni cards. That's really all it's there for. The gaining 3 life helps in certain situations, but most of the time it's just the fact that we can deal 1 damage on the opponent's turn at counter speed. Next, we run 3 copies of 5th Omni Dragon Sword, Dragobrave. Its equip cost is put a card from your hand into its soul, pay 1 gauge, and take 1 damage. Note it's taking a damage, so you can use it on your turn to trigger all of your 5th Omni stuff, and then whenever you take damage, put the top card of your deck into your gauge and gain a life. Then, if it's your turn, draw a card. So you don't draw off of its own ability, but the fact that any future damage you take is mitigated by 1 with the life gain, on top of which you'll charge, and if it's your turn, draw a card, is just extremely powerful. On top of which, it can attack even if you have a Armor Dragon monster in your center. And then lastly, for the impact, we run 2 copy of Fierce and Majestic End. You can only cast this card during your opponent's turn, and if a monster on your opponent's field has been destroyed by card effects this turn. You pay 2 gauge, and for each monster you destroyed during your opponent's turn, you deal 2 damage to them, and then the damage can't be reduced. So the idea is, because you're killing a lot of things with Mugen Drum's ability, you just play this impact and then deal all of that damage to the opponent for each monster. So if you've killed 3 monsters, then you'll deal 6 damage to them. So that's it for the main deck. Now, I do have a couple of other cards you could possibly run in the deck. You could also run 5th Omni Super Cavalier Dragon Hellfire Sword Doble. This is basically a way to eat at the opponent's gauge if you want. So it can't be called to the center. You pay 2 gauge and put the top card of your deck into its soul. And then when you're dealt damage, put a card from your opponent's gauge into his or her drop zone and put the top card of your deck into your gauge. You can only activate it once per turn. It's just a way to eat at the opponent's gauge. I don't like it so much because it's only once per turn, but depending on the matchups, eating away at that gauge on the first turn can be very important. You could also run 5th Omni Armor Dragon Thunderblade. Most of the time you just use its act ability to put the top 2 cards of your deck into your gauge and take 2 damage. So it's not at counter speed, which is why I'm not really too thrilled with it, but on your turn it's a solid way of just charging 2 gauge and proccing your other 5th Omni abilities. You could also run 5th Omni Oath. This card's pretty decent. You can only cast this when you've been dealt damage, and then you could call a size 2 monster with 5th Omni in its name from your drop to your left or right and pay its call cost. I'm not too thrilled with it because we just run Arkaid SD and it's the same effect but stronger because we still have to pay the call cost. This has the conditional of being a spell, so it can be nullified, on top of which it has the conditional of you have to take damage, where Arkaid SD you don't have to. And Arkaid SD is any size 2 or greater, and this is size 2 or less. So just some minor differences between the two cards, but you could run it. I don't feel like it's necessary because we have Arkaid SD. You could also run Omnilord's Resonance. You look at the top 5 cards of your deck, put up to 2 Omnilords among them into your hand, then you could put 3 Omnilords into your drop, and then the rest go on to the bottom. You could also run Dragowhite Separate. By paying a gauge and taking a damage, you can rest a size 2 monster or item on your opponent's field. You could also run Road to Champion. For 1 gauge, you could choose up to one of the following 2. You could either put a size 2 or greater monster from your drop zone to your hand, so it helps us fish back all of the stuff that we used up if it's size 2 or greater, or we could rest a monster on the opponent's field. You could also run Dragon Change. So you take a damage, and if you have a 5th Omni monster on your fields during this turn, the next time it would be destroyed, you prevent it. So it's just a way of protecting Drum, it's a way of protecting Sandstaff, it's a way of protecting just anything with 5th Omni. You could also run Dragon Guard. You can only cast this card if you're being attacked, and then you just change the attack to you and draw a card. So the idea is like they're trying to kill off your Drum or any of your 5th Omnis that you want to keep on the field, then you just cast this, change the attack to you, take a damage, proc their abilities, and draw a card. If you want, you could also run Buddy Option. Buddy Option's just there so that Drum's abilities can't be nullified, or if you really want to try to close out games, you could just give him Penetrate. And then you could run Loyalty. Loyalty is just a really solid card in general. You either reduce the damage you take by 2, drop a soul of a monster on the field, or for this turn your opponent can't call past their 3rd monster. So it's just a really solid card. You could also run Lost World if you want. There's enough draw to where you could run Lost World. I don't particularly think you need it because most of the time your board is full anyway, because they're not really going to be attacking you a whole lot because of Drum's ability. You just proc it on their attack step and then kill the attacking monster as long as it can be killed by effects. So that is my interpretation of an updated version of 5th Omnis. So I think 5th Omnis are a pretty fun control deck. They definitely have a lot of interaction on your opponent's turn. The one thing you have to watch is your life, because sometimes if you let your life go too low, you might not be able to trigger some of the abilities of your cards. It's just a very interesting and fun control deck to play. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video.